Before big handhelds like the Steam Deck, the biggest handheld that I own personally was the Switch OLED, but things have changed since then. When it comes to ARM handhelds, we have stuff like the Switch OLED and of course the Odin 2. The Odin 2 is pretty big and a lot of people really liked it. Ever since using a lot of x86 handhelds this year like the ROG Ally X and of course the Legion Go, I've kind of gotten used to big devices in general. When the Odin 2 Portal was announced, I was pretty interested. If we could take a device like the Odin 2 and just make it a little bit bigger, it might just be absolutely perfect for what I wanted it for. This would give me a really good balance of screen size to portability and also ergonomics. Yesterday, the Odin 2 Portal just showed up, so let's hop in and take a closer look to see what this thing's all about. I love the Odin 2, but for me personally, I just wasn't a fan of the IPS screen, especially since trying new devices like the Redroid Pocket 5. While the Odin Portal checks so many boxes for me personally, I think this just might be the one. Starting things off with the pricing and how these different models are organized, you can get this currently on Indiegogo. There are 3 models available. There's the Portal Base, which comes in at 479 Canadian. You can also get the Portal Pro at 571 Canadian or the Portal Max at 718. For my American viewers, that works out to $334 US for the early bird on the base, $398 US for the Portal Pro, or about $100 more for the Portal Max at 501. These are all still the early bird pricing too. At first glance, these do appear pretty expensive. But for what you're getting, I do still think that the Portal Base and the Portal Pro might just be worth it for you. If you've used an OLED screen before, you know there's just no comparison to an IPS panel. The big standout feature of this device in particular is the 7-inch 1080p 120Hz OLED screen. We get over 800 nits of brightness here. That means your colors are going to be extremely vibrant. There's also zero bezel on this thing, just like on the RP5. 120Hz is really nice too. If you've ever used a 120Hz screen, you know how hard it is to go backwards. 60Hz is fine, but when you go up to 120Hz, especially on an OLED, things are just going to appear really smooth on screen. Their screen also supports 155% of the sRGB color gamut, which should give us a really vibrant panel. The base comes with 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. This should be perfectly fine for most emulation and some Android gaming. If you want more Android games or you're looking forward to PC emulation, I would definitely bump that up to the 12GB with the 512GB of internal storage. I just can't see a reason to get the 16GB of RAM with the 1TB of internal storage, unless you just wanted to ditch the microSD card entirely. This should also have pretty good cooling, but I'll take a closer look at the temperatures later. They did have a smaller battery in this at first, but they bumped it up to 8,000 mAh. I think with the 120Hz panel and the bigger screen in general, that was a really good call. There's only 3 colors available, so you can get black, indigo, or white. I think the black model is my favorite of the 3, but if you're worried about fingerprints though, definitely go for the white model. The last big standout feature of this device in particular is it has Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.3. This should make this device really good for streaming. I just want to say before we start that this unit was sent to me by AYN as a review unit. As with all my reviews, the company is not seeing this beforehand. They have no input in what I say. They're not paying me for this review, and of course, all opinions are my own. I'm just going to give you guys my honest thoughts to what I think about these. So let's just hop in. Alright, so let's take a closer look and see what comes in the box. I think the packaging and this little holographic card look really cool. Nice touch. On this card, we have an overlay of the device and the specifications. And then of course, the portal itself. This thing looks way bigger than I thought it was gonna. Let's lift this out. It's got a really good weight to it. Let's save that for later. Let's see what else it comes with. In the box, we find a USB-C to USB-C cable. This is the same one that came with the Odin 2 Mini. I personally really like this. This is actually the charging cable I take with me to work. I know for a fact that this supports 100-watt quick charging on my other devices, so I know this is a really good cable. And these little ends are also made out of metal. Now it's the best part of the review, taking a closer look at the device itself. First impressions, this thing is much bigger than I thought it was going to be. This thing looks amazing in person. Taking a quick glance around the device, it looks to have basically the same size grips as you see on the Odin 2, and I think it has the same kind of plastic too, so this is going to catch some fingerprints. I love this crosshatch design for the air intake. There's definitely a lot of glass here on the front though, and on the sides too. I'm just really worried about fingerprints. Let's do a quick overview of the device itself before we hop into anything else. We have the select button up here on the top left, start button on the top right. You got your home button on the bottom left and the back button on the bottom right. The two joysticks are offset like we see on most Android devices. The face buttons are up here on the top and they've gone with an Xbox style layout. I'm really happy to see this. I think a lot of people are going to use this for streaming. We got two front facing speakers. I think this is a really good call on their part. On the top of the device, we have the two bumpers. These are really nice bumpers. Out of all the Android devices that I've tried, these are actually probably my favorite. I also really love these huge paddle triggers. They have a lot of travel to them, they're really smooth, and they don't make a lot of noise when they're bottoming out. We also have the air exhaust up on the top, the power button, and the volume button. On the bottom, we don't have anything but the micro SD card slot, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and the USB-C out. I'll take a closer look at the charging later. On the back, we have two programmable paddles. They are really clicky, but they don't appear to be very loose. We also have the air intake vent, which covers most of the top half. How does the Portal stack up size-wise to other handhelds that I own? The smallest Android handheld that I own is the Retroid Pocket Mini. This thing is just tiny compared to the Portal. Width-wise, it's almost about 2 Retroid Pocket Minis wide, and just putting this over shows just how much taller it is. This is one small handheld. The grip on the Retroid Pocket Mini is slightly bigger on the bottom. There's more of a pronounced dip in the center on the Portal. The triggers on the Portal are more flared as well. You can also see that the joystick on the Portal sticks out way further. Stepping things up to an even bigger device, the Retroid Pocket 5 is still way smaller than the Portal. A lot of these devices are going to be. This is about as big as you can get before this device is just not pocketable. Anything bigger though, and you'll definitely have trouble sticking it in your pocket. The size of the grips on these are also very similar. I think they could have definitely gotten away with slightly bigger grips on the Portal. It's about 1.25 Retroid Pocket 5s wide, about an inch taller, and about 2 inches wider. Moving things up from there, the Switch Lite is still much smaller than the Portal. It's about 1.5 inches wider. The Switch Lite is taller than the Retroid Pocket 5, so this is almost the same height as the Portal. The Switch Lite unfortunately has no grips on the back at all, but the joystick height is very similar. The Portal joystick height is ever so slightly taller than a standard Switch. Moving things up to the Odin 2, this is where devices start getting a little closer. This is a little bit under an inch shorter on the side. Height-wise, these are pretty comparable. The Portal is just ever so slightly taller. Looking at the grip size, it almost looks like the Odin 2 has a bigger grip than the Portal. The bottom of the Odin 2 is ever so slightly bigger, but the top of the Odin 2 also looks to be a little bit bigger as well. The trigger design is slightly different on both. Comparing to the Odin 2, the Portal has taller joysticks. We gotta compare this thing to some bigger handhelds. Let's bump up the scale a little bit. The Switch OLED comes pretty dang close. They're almost the same width, but the Switch OLED is definitely taller. Again, the Switch just has no grips on the back, so the Portal definitely beats it out in ergonomics. The joystick height is just ever so slightly taller than a standard Switch. Bumping things up to an even bigger handheld, the ROG Ally is just much bigger. Looking at this right on top of the ROG Ally, there's just a little bit more on the top and just ever so slightly more on the side. The ROG Ally X has full-size joysticks, whereas the Portal is just using joysticks that are slightly taller than the Switch as we saw. The Legion Go is so much bigger than the Portal, it's almost hilarious. That is quite the difference in size. The Legion Go has slightly taller joysticks, but it does have some huge ergonomic grips on the back. Unfortunately, this device is very heavy compared to anything else that I own. I can't even compare these two side by side just because they're so different. I think the Portal has a really good balance of size to portability. Just how heavy is this compared to those other devices that we just looked at? Let's see how this stacks up. Starting things off on the smallest Android handheld, the Retroid Pocket Mini comes in at 223.8 grams. Stepping things up, the Retroid Pocket 5 comes in at 272.4 grams. The Switch Lite comes in at 285.2 grams. The original Odin 2 comes in at 426.1 grams. The Switch OLED comes out to 436.5 grams. It's also worth noting that there is a game in here, so that is the weight with a game in it. The Portal is nearly on par with the Switch OLED at 437.8 grams. My ROG Ally X weighs in at 698 grams. You can definitely feel the weight difference here. and the Giant Legion Go tops the scales at 880.2 grams. I think AYN definitely knew what they were doing here. Keeping this device pretty close to the Switch OLED in size and weight was a genius idea. Let's take a close look and see if there's anything amiss with this device or any quality control issues. I'm not noticing any issues with the glass on mine. The seam around the edge shows no visible damage, and the plastic molding appears to be really good too. All in all, I can't really find any build quality faults on this device. This is pretty good to see. If I'm really picky about it, there's a little bit of wear underneath the trigger, but I'm not too concerned about this because most of the time you're not looking at the back anyways. The rest of the plastic appears to be okay. It is the same kind of plastic we saw on the Odin 2. I kind of wish they went with a textured plastic on this so it resists fingerprints a little bit better. This is definitely picking up a few. This used to bother me a lot, but I've kind of just gotten used to it owning the Odin 2. The buttons look really good and they all work really well. The joysticks don't appear to have any issues and they're really smooth. The other one appears to be okay too and it's working well. The D-pad pivots really nicely. All in all, excellent build quality. One thing that I also noticed that I just didn't notice initially was that the glass is actually curved down. I initially thought that the glass being curved just meant the edge, but it's kind of cool to see that the glass is curved on the front like that. I've never seen that on a device before. Now I do want to take a closer look at these joysticks. They look to be a little taller than the ones that I've seen on the Retroid Pocket 5 and other devices. Let's take a quick peek at these and see how they stack up. These are the same kind of joysticks we've seen from the Retroid Pocket 5 and the RP Mini. They have a nice rubbery cap to them. The top is concaved. There's a good amount of pivot and they're well positioned for good ergonomics. I like the LED ring around the outside and acts as an anti-friction ring. This is personally one of the smoothest joysticks I've seen on a handheld. We also have L3 and R3 functionality. There's a nice soft click when you push it down. There's also a ton of range on these joysticks. These joystick caps measure in at 13.5 millimeters. For some context, this is the same size as the ones on the Odin 2, and exactly the same size as the ones on the Retroid Pocket 5. Standard Switch style joystick caps are 1 millimeter bigger. I actually think these joysticks are a lot better than what I was expecting. When you use the portal, they're positioned really well for great ergonomics. Face buttons are up next. There's a nice rubber membrane click to them. They don't have a lot of wiggle, and I don't think they're going to be rubbing on the shell anytime soon. Maxing out the zoom of my camera, you can definitely see some nice texture on these as well. Good size face buttons too. These face buttons measure in at 8.2 millimeters, which is ever so slightly bigger than the Odin 2 at 7.3, and bigger than the ones on the Retroid Pocket 5 as those measure 7.2. The start and select buttons are very clicky. It sounds like a micro switch underneath. Not clicky enough to bother me, and I think they're pretty nice. The home and the back button are the same. Moving things up to the trigger, there's a nice range of motion. It's pretty easy to push on the bottom, then as you move up to the top, it starts getting ever so slightly harder. I can push the bumper fine till about this little bend here. Then it gets a little hard to push. The way this sits in your hand, you're probably not going to go past that anyways. The triggers have a really good amount of travel to them. There's a nice texture on both of these that does a good job at resisting fingerprints. This is smooth all the way to the bottom, and there's no bottoming out sound. Excellent triggers, and I love the amount of flair these have. The D-pad is really good, and there's a nice amount of space around it so it doesn't rub on the shell. You're not likely to get any false diagonals with this. It's a really good D-pad. This feels like the same D-pad that I saw in the Retroid Pocket 5. I think the ergonomics are going to be a huge point of debate on this device, but personally for me, with medium-sized hands, I find this extremely comfortable to hold on to. If you've used the Odin 2 before, this is just ever so slightly more comfortable than that, but these taller joysticks do add to that level of comfort. There's some nice round edges that fit in the palm of your hand, and these triggers up here rest comfortably with your pointer fingers. On the back, there's a good amount of grip for your hands to rest onto. I generally wrap my fingers around these grips. If you spread your hands across the back, I find it even more comfortable. I don't think I'm going to have any concerns with ergonomics, and I'm pretty sure you'll be okay too, especially if you're coming from the Odin 2. I like bigger handhelds, and I think this fits my hands really nice. So as far as ergonomics goes, this definitely gets a thumbs up from me. Now something I'm excited to do is just to turn this thing on. I've heard lots of really good things about this panel in particular, and I'm eager to move past the IPS on the Odin 2 to something much more modern. I wanted a brighter screen and I wanted something more colorful, and I think this thing is going to blow me away. I haven't turned this on yet, but let's go ahead and try it and see what it looks like. One of the good things about black units is you're not going to see that bezel around the edge when you're having black content on the screen, so it's really nice. Before we talk about the device any further, I did have to adjust the exposure and the ISO on my camera. The rest of the video is going to look a little darker for that reason. But I did go ahead and max out the brightness on this, and it does look much better in person. This panel is absolutely incredible. I've never seen a device with this good of screen. Just turning it on, that's instantly what I noticed. It's just incredible. But as mentioned, this does look better in person. I've just tried to adjust it so it doesn't blow out the exposure. There is also a bug on the OS right now where the top status bar is missing, and the 3-button navigation bar on the bottom is now missing too. I can't load up the recent apps and just swap it back and forth from there. I figure we should do a quick boot test just to see how quick this starts up. Let's test it with the Odin 2 side by side and see which one's faster. Okay, so I've got both of these off now. Let's go ahead and boot them up. So the Odin 2 was a little bit quicker. It's kind of expected though, because this has had more updates than the Portal has so far. Once the Portal gets optimized after a few more updates, this should be about the same speed. Let's zoom in here and do a quick test on the internal memory and the RAM. Let's start off with the internal memory and see what kind of performance it's giving us. This might take a little while, so let's come back at the end and see how it does. And we got some pretty impressive results. The read speeds are at 1.2 gigabytes per second, or 1200 megabytes per second. Write speeds are sitting at about 700 megabytes per second. That's actually pretty good for an Android device. Let's try the RAM next. This one should be much quicker, as RAM is a lot faster than internal storage. The RAM is incredibly quick at 70,000 megabytes per second. Another thing that blew me away on this device in particular is the speakers. These are probably the best speakers I've heard on an Android device, and I don't think anything comes close. Let me show you what they sound like. Let's load up a game and I'll give you a quick sound test. I would say these speakers sound cleaner than the rest of the competition, but I would say that the Odin 2 is a little bit louder. If I had to put them in order, I would say that this one does sound the best, at least to me personally. Coming in second place is probably the Odin 2, followed by maybe the Retroid Pocket 5, then the Retroid Pocket Mini, and then in last place, of course, is the Nintendo Switch OLED. I know people are going to be wondering about the rumble on this, so let's load up a game that's known for good rumble. I like to use Wreckfest for this example because this one is really easy to trigger it. All I have to do is run into a wall. This is also going to show us really how well this thing is at gaming. I'm going to max this out. I'm also going to set the FPS limit to max. I'm going to set the screen scaling just to ultra though, but I'm going to max out the rest of the settings. Then all I have to do is find the nearest wall and make contact. Of course, I think I shut off the rumble. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that working in Wreckfest, but if we go to the Odin settings, we can test it here. Testing it on medium, I'll be honest, I'm not really impressed with the rumble. Medium is just too strong for the shell. Low is actually pretty good. Anything higher and it just doesn't sound very good. I'm just going to leave this to low. I like to do a quick panel test to make sure that everything's working. First things first, you want to make sure to check for dead pixels or any uniformity issues. Panel on this device in particular doesn't seem to have any. You might be seeing a little bit thicker black bezel on the bottom. That's because the 3-button navigation issue. This is already known to AYN, so they're working on a fix. There's no issues on green, and it looks completely solid. This is another nice feature of AMOLED and OLED panels. You just get perfect uniformity. Green looks good. There's nothing going on with blue, but you can see the strobing on camera that you can't see in person. This is just the way the OLED panel refreshes. When you get to gray, you can kind of look for vignetting around the edge. I'm not seeing any dark edges and no dead pixels. Excellent quality control on the panel. Thanks to this being AMOLED, as soon as you switch to black, it just shuts off the panel. If I shut off my lights, this is going to be even more visible, so watch. This is gray, and black is completely off. Max brightness on this is extremely bright, at 800 nits. Minimum brightness is so dark that you can barely see it, even in the dark. This is a good wide range of applications, so if you want to play this at night, you're going to be able to turn that screen down really low. You can also play this really good outside in bright light. Even with my bright studio lights on it, the panel is still extremely visible. Let me show you one of the advantages of an AMOLED or OLED panel. Let's shut off the light. Only the pixels that are actually needing to be illuminated are illuminated. Unlike mini LED, where they have to dim zones, you're not getting a halo effect around any of the panel. If this was a mini LED, you'd notice some glow around it. Because the zones are only so big, it has to illuminate one on the edge. On OLED and AMOLED, this is not an issue. YouTube media playback looks really good, but you can't seem to adjust the quality for some reason. This video here supports 4K, but unfortunately I can't even adjust it. Either way, I'm pretty sure this is defaulting to 1080p. The screen is really good, and thanks to that OLED panel, it can just shut off a lot of these parts you're not using. The colors are extremely rich and vibrant too. There's really no comparison between this and the original Odin 2 panel. The blacks look way deeper thanks to that nice OLED, and the colors just look way richer. It's incredible to see panels this good on handhelds. When I first got into this hobby, there was no way that you'd see this on a handheld. We're really being spoiled with these nice screens. The Retroid Pocket 5 does a much better job at keeping up with the panel on the Portal. Unfortunately, the Portal is just way brighter. This means that the colors are going to look way better on the Portal. Even at max brightness on both, the RP5 screen just can't keep up. Either way, I do like the screen on the Retroid Pocket 5, but the one on the Portal is just so much better. You do have to keep in mind though that the Retroid Pocket 5 is much cheaper than the Portal, and I do think for the price, it's a fantastic screen. When you compare it to the Portal though, you do notice some differences. For me anyways, the biggest differences is just that brightness, and the colors are just ever so slightly more vibrant. So what about the Switch OLED? Well, if we compare them side by side, there's still a stark difference between this and the Portal screen. The Portal screen, again, is just way more vibrant. The colors just look way deeper on the Portal screen. Again, the screen is just much brighter. I honestly don't know how AYN puts such a good panel on a device like this. It doesn't matter which device I compare to this screen, the Odin Portal is winning in every situation. This is the best IPS screen that I own personally, which is the one on the Legion Go. But side by side again, this one is just so much better. Being OLED, IPS just can't keep up. Simply put, the screen on this Odin 2 is the best screen out of all the handhelds that I currently own. No handheld that I currently own comes close to the screen on this device. It's absolutely incredible. If you're looking to play some media content on this, this is obviously one of the best devices for it. And I think this is a really cool use case for a handheld. Flying over to Japan gave me a good excuse to sit down and watch some movies that I've been waiting for quite a while. Now that we have a good device with a good screen, it makes it an easy recommendation, especially if people want to watch media on the go. Either way, I love the screen on the Portal, and I think you will too. Screen is definitely a true 120Hz panel, and I'm not getting any stuttering whatsoever. This handheld actually has DRM on it, so we can actually watch movies on here now. 1080p playback works on Crunchyroll, and it also works on Disney+. The other streaming apps that I tried all worked great as well. I don't have Netflix though, so I wasn't able to test that. Next up, I'm going to check the temperatures on this. I'm going to leave this stress test running for a little while. After a while of running this, let's come back and see what these temperatures look like. I've set the performance mode to performance, and the fan is just set to smart. So I did restart the test just to pull up the overlay, and the temperature seemed to be stable at around just under 70 degrees Celsius. It's not too hot, but it is a little warm. The CPU is doing a good job at boosting itself as needed. The temperature on the GPU though is sitting at around 71 degrees Celsius, which is a little warm. The temperature hasn't made the GPU throttle at all, and it's sitting at 680 megahertz. Taking a look at the temperatures on the back, the grips sit at a comfortable 28 degrees Celsius or 83 degrees Fahrenheit. The other one is also 28 degrees Celsius. In the center on the back, it sits at about 34 degrees Celsius almost, or 92 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of the back is pretty cool, but near the exhaust, you're looking at about 38 degrees Celsius. That's at about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The front near your hands is extremely comfortable. I'm amazed that the device can run this cool with how thin it is. This brings us to my next point. If the emulation is available and runs on Android, this device isn't going to have any issues with the performance. I personally think that this is about as good as any Android device needs to be for the foreseeable future until we actually start seeing PC emulation kind of catch up. Winlator is doing a really good job at emulating PC games, and a lot of stuff is now playable. I haven't set it up on this yet, but I did want to just test everything else to make sure it works. If it runs on the Odin 2 though, it's going to run on here. I might go over streaming a little bit more in another video, but for now I just want to test Steam Link. I'm going to set enhanced 1080p, customize, the video is going to be set to beautiful, low latency audio is going to be enabled. Bandwidth limit, you don't want to set this too high. On a screen this big at 1080p, 40 megabits per second is probably fine. Leave the frame rate set to automatic, and the resolution limit can just be set to the panel. I'm going to leave that at 1080p. Hardware decoding, make sure that's enabled. HEVC video codec, make sure to turn that on. AV1, leave that off. Low latency networking, make sure that's enabled. Leave off uncompressed audio, and leave direct connection to enabled. Now the mini PC that I have this set up to is to a TV that only has 4K 60. So I'm going to have to set this to 60 Hz. You're going to notice a lot of stuttering if you're streaming and your device is set to 120 Hz, but your PC is set to 60. So I've gone ahead and dropped that down to 60 Hz, and we should be a-okay. I'm also going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see the quality. On my 4070 Ti Super, I can't max all the settings. I set the resolution scale to 70, the DLSS is on, frame generation is off, ray tracing is off, and the rest of the settings are set to very high and high. This is also with the TV pushing out 4K. So let's give it a try. The quality looks really good. It's streaming pretty smoothly here, but I definitely would recommend checking out Moonlight or another alternative. However, with only 40 megabytes per second video, the latency is pretty good, and on general, I'm getting under 4.5 milliseconds of ping. Packet loss is also 0. In case you're wondering as well, this is actually really comfortable to game on. To me anyways, this just kind of feels like playing on a mini x86 handheld. It's funny because the screen on this is better than my TV. I think if I'm at home, I'm more likely to play on this than on my TV. Local streaming is really getting good. A side note as well, but this game is just one of the best graphically intensive games I've ever seen. It's incredible to see how good graphics are getting on games now. I told myself I really wasn't going to try another Souls game, but I'm happy that I picked this one up. If you haven't bought this yet, I highly recommend checking out Wukong. For streaming and for how easy it is to set up, I think you'll be okay with Steam Link. This is probably one of the big use cases for this device for me is just streaming. When I get home at the end of the day, one of the last places I want to sit is at my desk. Personally, I'd rather just turn this on, sit down on my couch, and relax. Streaming is awesome on here. AYN has always been really accurate with their charging estimates that they give us, and this appears to be no different with the Odin Portal. This is charging at 8.7 volts, 3 amps with 25 watt quick charging. So should you buy the Odin 2 Portal? Well, yes and no. If you like the idea of the Retroid Pocket 5 and you want more power and a slightly bigger device, you can't really go wrong with the Portal. There's very little fault to this device in general, and I really do like it. The Retroid Pocket 5 is still a fantastic device, and if you don't need the extra power and you want something more pocketable, this is still the one I'd recommend. If you own the Odin 2 and you kind of wish it had a better panel, or you just wish this was a little bit bigger in general, then the Portal's probably right for you, and it's definitely worth the price. I'd recommend the base or the Pro model. If you're going to play more Android games, pick up the Pro model. The Portal is a fantastic handheld, and this is definitely endgame for Android for the good foreseeable future. It's got fantastic speakers, good ergonomics, the face buttons and all the controls are really nice. I also really like the D-pad. These are the best triggers I've seen on an Android handheld and even rival some of the x86 devices that I've tried. The bumpers are really nice. I really do like the grips on the back. They're really comfy and it charges really fast. It runs pretty cool and the display is just top notch. If you want one Android device and you don't want to buy any more for a good while, pick up the Portal. That's my advice anyways. There's only two things that I don't really like about this device, one of them being the fingerprints. While filming this entire review, I've had a microfiber cloth and I've just constantly been wiping off these little specks of dust and my fingerprints. This just picks up so many fingerprints. If you were to get one of those screen protectors, those resist fingerprints really good. You might even be able to get away with some third-party screen protectors that just cover the screen itself. I think this is probably very close to the Switch OLED in size. And then the second thing, of course, is just more fingerprint stuff. AYN's plastics have always been a little smudgy. This one's not too bad, but I live in a pretty dry climate, so it doesn't really affect me as much as other people. If you're more prone to fingerprints and that kind of bothers you, go for the white model and I don't think you're going to be bothered. It's not too bad. So what do you think of the Odin 2 Portal? Do you like it and are you picking one up? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe as I'm getting really close to 10,000 subs and I'd love to hit that this year. I can't thank everyone enough for being part of my community. But if you have any questions regarding the Portal, make sure to ask in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.